She was sitting in that hospital waiting room, hands shaking from the pre-surgery anxiety, when her mother-in-law looked her dead in the eye and said, "Maybe you should just go home. We don't need your kind of drama today." The security guard was already walking over. But 2 hours later, when that cherry-red Ferrari pulled up to the hospital entrance and Dr. Chen stepped out asking for Mrs. Williams, Margaret's face went white as the hospital sheets. Before we dive into this story that'll make you question everything you think you know about judging people, hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. Trust me, you're going to want to hear every single detail of what happened when Keisha's private physician made his entrance. Let's get into it. You know how they say you can't judge a book by its cover? Well, Keisha Williams learned the hard way that some people will judge your entire library based on the neighborhood it's in. This is the story of Keisha and how one devastating morning in a hospital waiting room changed everything she thought. She knew about family, respect, and the power of quiet dignity. It started 6 months earlier when she was 28, working as a night shift custodian at the downtown medical complex. She'd been doing it for 3 years, saving every penny she could, while taking online courses toward her nursing degree. The work was honest, the hours were brutal, but it paid the bills and kept her moving toward her dream. Keisha had this way of finding beauty in the work nobody else wanted to do. She'd hum while she mopped, leave little encouraging notes for the day shift nurses, and somehow made even the hospital smell a little better with the pride she took in her work. She believed that every job had dignity, if you brought dignity to it. That's the kind of character she thought mattered until she met David Williams. She was restocking supplies in the ICU around 2 a.m. when she heard someone crying in the family lounge. David was sitting there in his scrubs, head in his hands, looking absolutely broken. "Rough night?" she asked softly, offering him a tissue from her cart. "Lost a patient," he whispered. 7-year-old girl. "I've been a resident for 2 years and I still don't know how to." "You care," Keisha said simply. "That's how you handle it. You care enough to cry." David looked up at this woman in custodial uniform who somehow understood what his attending physicians couldn't. He was this brilliant surgical resident, Harvard med graduate, but she saw the human in him that everyone else missed. For the next 4 months, their 2 a.m. conversations became the highlight of both their days. David would bring her coffee from the doctor's lounge, real coffee, not the burnt stuff from the vending machines. She'd share stories about the patients she'd seen recover, the small miracles that happened when nobody was watching. He started timing his breaks around her schedule, finding excuses to check on supplies in whatever wing she was cleaning. This man, who was used to operating rooms and medical conferences, found peace in watching her work. In her gentle observations about the patients and staff, she was falling hard, and she thought he was, too. But then she met his family. The first dinner at their house was like stepping into a museum exhibit titled Old Money Medicine. The Williams family home in the suburbs was all marble columns and oil paintings of distinguished ancestors, with a circular driveway that could fit 6 cars. Margaret Williams was a retired neurosurgeon who carried herself like she was still making life-or-death decisions. Dr. Robert Williams was the chief of cardiology at the city's most prestigious private hospital. They had money, old money, medical dynasty money, and they wore it like armor. Margaret greeted her with a smile that never reached her eyes. "So you're the cleaning lady David's been telling us about," she said, making Keisha's job sound like something that needed to be disinfected. Throughout dinner, she kept making these little comments. "It must be so rewarding to work with your hands, dear. So honest. I imagine the hospital looks quite different at night than it does during real working hours. David's always had a soft spot for the underprivileged. Even in med school, always volunteering at those free clinics. Robert was kinder, but said nothing when his wife spoke. David would cringe and try to redirect the conversation, but he never directly confronted his mother's condescension. The worst part was that Margaret wasn't even trying to hide her disdain. She was performing it, making sure Keisha knew exactly where she stood in their world. Every comment was designed to remind her that she was visiting a place she didn't belong. But Keisha loved David, so she kept trying. She brought homemade bread to the next dinner, researched medical topics she thought might interest Robert, even complimented Margaret on her garden. She told herself that love would be enough, that they'd eventually see who she really was beyond her job title and her apartment in the wrong part of town. Then David proposed to her on the hospital roof, where they'd had their first real conversation. It was simple, honest, perfect, just like their relationship had been. For about 2 weeks, she thought she was living in a fairy tale. Then they went to tell his parents, and Margaret's first words were, "Well, I suppose we'll need to discuss the prenuptial agreement." She said it like she was commenting on the weather, like it was as natural as breathing. David shifted uncomfortably, but didn't object. That night, Margaret called Keisha directly. "Dear, I hope you understand this isn't personal. It's just that David has worked so hard to build his medical practice, and with your financial situation, well, we just want to protect everyone involved." The prenup was brutal. No claim to any assets acquired before marriage, limited alimony of $2,000 monthly for maximum 2 years. No inheritance rights to family medical practices or properties. A reputation clause that allowed the family to void support if she brought negative attention to the Williams name. David sat there while his mother's lawyer explained each clause to Keisha, nodding along like this was normal procedure for people in love. "It's just paperwork, baby," he whispered to her. "It doesn't change anything between us." But it meant everything to her. It meant they saw her as a gold digger, a liability, someone who would inevitably try to steal what they'd built. It meant that even David, her David who knew her heart, couldn't see past his mother's paranoia long enough to defend her character. She signed it anyway. She signed it because she loved him, because she wanted to prove them wrong about her intentions, and because part of her had started to wonder if maybe they were right to be suspicious. She signed it with tears streaming down her face, while Margaret watched with the satisfaction of a surgeon who'd just successfully removed a tumor. 3 months later, everything changed for Keisha. Her father, James Washington, had raised her alone after her mother died when she was 12. He worked what she thought was a maintenance job at various office buildings downtown, but he never missed a school play, never forgot to help with homework, never made her feel like they were missing anything important. He worked long hours and came home tired, but he never missed their Sunday morning pancakes or their evening walks around the neighborhood where he'd point out constellations and tell her stories about strong black women who'd changed the world. He taught her that dignity came from within, that hard work was its own reward, and that kindness was the most powerful force in the universe. Her dad was her hero, her best friend, and her biggest supporter. So when he had the stroke at 58, her world stopped. She spent 3 days in the ICU, holding his hand, talking to him about her wedding plans and David's residency. David was wonderful during the crisis, covering her shifts, bringing her food, sleeping in uncomfortable chairs beside her. On the 3rd day, her dad squeezed her hand and whispered, "The safe deposit box, baby girl. Box 247 at First National." The key's in my bedroom dresser. Don't let them make you small. He died 6 hours later. The funeral was simple, held at the community center where he'd volunteered. Keisha was surprised by how many people came. Building, managers, security guards, office workers she'd never met. They all had stories about James, about his kindness, his reliability, his quiet generosity. A week after the funeral, she got a call from a lawyer named Patricia Chen. "Ms. Washington, I need to speak with you about your father's estate." Keisha almost laughed. "Ma'am, with all due respect, my dad was a maintenance worker. There's no estate, just some old furniture and maybe a couple thousand in savings." Thicky's safety deposit box was small and dusty. Inside were documents, photographs, and letters she'd never seen before. The first thing she saw was a yellowed newspaper clipping. "Washington Property Development sells downtown complex for $50 million. There were photos of her father in suits she'd never seen him wear, shaking hands with city officials, cutting ribbons at building openings, certificates showing ownership of multiple properties, bank statements with numbers that made her dizzy. Her father, her quiet, humble father, who took the bus to work and shopped at discount stores, was worth over $30 million. The letters explained everything. "My beautiful daughter," one read, "I wanted you to grow up knowing the value of work, the importance of character over cash. I've seen what money does to people, how it makes them cruel and entitled. I wanted you to know who you were before you knew what you had. I've been watching you build your life, and I'm so proud. You chose a man who loves you for your heart, not your bank account. You chose work that helps people, even when it's hard. You chose kindness even when others chose judgment." She discovered her father had been quietly funding scholarships for healthcare workers, donating to food banks, paying rent for families facing eviction, all under the name of the Washington Foundation. When she finally met with Patricia Chen, she explained that after taxes and existing charitable commitments, Keisha was looking at an inheritance of approximately $18 million. $18 million. She thought about that prenup sitting in Margaret Williams's family safe. That night, she sat David down and told him everything. His reaction was immediate shock, then hurt. "Why didn't you tell me your family had money? I feel like I don't even know you." "Because this is exactly why," she said quietly. "Because you're looking at me differently right now than you did 5 minutes ago, and I haven't changed at all." She watched him process the role reversal, the uncomfortable realization that he'd been part of a family that had judged her financial worth while she'd been sitting on more money than any of them. The next family dinner was interesting. She didn't announce her inheritance. She just dropped hints. "I might take some time off work to handle some family business. My father apparently had more investments than I realized. I'm meeting with some financial advisors about foundation work." Margaret barely looked up from her salad. "That's nice, dear. I'm sure your father was very responsible with his small savings." That's when she pulled out the bank statements. Margaret's fork clattered to her plate. Robert nearly choked on his wine. David stared at the numbers like they were written in a foreign language. "Sorry," Margaret stammered. "These numbers? They can't be right. 18 million? That's after taxes and charitable commitments," Keisha said calmly. "My father was James Washington. You might have heard of Washington Property Development." Robert's recognition was immediate. "James Washington? The James Washington? Jesus. Keisha, he owned half of downtown." What happened next was almost comical. The family's attitude shifted so fast you could get whiplash. Margaret started backtracking about every condescending comment she'd ever made, suddenly remembering how she'd always seen something special in Keisha. Robert began treating her like a fellow colleague, asking about her foundation plans and offering to help with medical charity connections. David's sister, who'd barely spoken to her in months, suddenly wanted to be best friends. But the person she was most interested in watching was David. He was embarrassed, uncomfortable, fidgeting with his napkin like it held the answers to questions he was afraid to ask. "Why didn't you just tell me?" he kept asking. "Why did you let us? Why did you let my mother treat you like that?" "Would it have changed anything?" she asked. "Would you have loved me more? Would your mother have been kinder? Or would you have just loved me for different reasons?" He couldn't answer, and they both knew why. The relationship limped along for another month, but it was over. David couldn't handle being the one who needed financial security. He'd fallen in love with being her rescuer, her ticket to a better life. Now that she was the one with options, he didn't know how to relate to her. Margaret's attempts to rebuild their relationship were almost painful to watch. Suddenly, she was interested in Keisha's opinions, her family history, her plans for the foundation. But Keisha had seen her true colors, and Margaret's newfound respect was transparently tied to her bank balance. The final straw came when David suggested they renew their vows without the prenup. Like that would erase everything that had happened. "You want to marry me again?" she asked. "I want to do it right this time," he said. "The man I fell in love with would have done it right the first time," she replied. "He would have defended me to his family. He would have refused to let them humiliate me with that prenup. He would have seen my worth before he saw my net worth." She gave him back the ring and kept the prenup. Not because she was bitter, but because it reminded her of a lesson she never wanted to forget. 6 months later, she established the James Washington Healthcare Foundation, focusing on education scholarships for healthcare workers from underserved communities. She still works at the hospital, though now as a registered nurse, having completed her degree. She's also on the board of directors, having purchased a significant stake in the medical complex. She's met someone new, Marcus, a paramedic who makes $45,000 a year and drives a 10-year-old Honda Civic. But he stood up to his own family when they made jokes about her being out of his league. He celebrates her success without feeling diminished by it. And he fell in love with her work ethic before he knew about her wealth. Her father's gift wasn't just the money. It was the lesson that true worth can't be measured in dollars, and that people who judge you by your bank account aren't worthy of your time. Margaret's prenup was supposed to protect the Williams family assets, but it ended up protecting Keisha from a family that would never truly value her. Sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is show you exactly who they are when they think you can't fight back. That prenup was the most expensive lesson in self-respect she never knew she needed. That prenup taught Keisha the most valuable lesson of her life. Your worth isn't determined by other people's perception of your wealth. Her father hid his success to teach her character. But she learned that true strength means never having to prove your value to people who are determined not to see it. If this story resonated with you, smash that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding your power. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever been underestimated because of your job, your background, or your appearance? How did you handle it? We read every single comment. Until next time, remember that your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth.